Welcome to Campfire. My name is Mariah Byrne, and I am Campfire's Operations and Engagement Lead. I have the pleasure of hosting tonight's Campfire with the Advanced Storytelling cohort. At Campfire, we believe that stories are essential to creating change. Stories give us meaning, stories give us connection. Stories impact both the listener and the teller. We are so glad you are here. Our storytellers are glad you are here. Let's introduce tonight's storytellers. Tonight, you'll be hearing from Cindy, Carlo, Melinda, and Jude. They all just completed their advanced course over 6 class sessions. After a brief refresher on what they learned in Intro to Storytelling, the storytellers took a deep dive into ensuring that as public speakers, their intentions align with their impact. They also practice learning to really listen and love their own voices. They practice giving and receiving constructive peer feedback throughout the course. This brings us to this campfire before you tonight. Our students had been carrying these stories with themselves already. We just helped bring them out. Tonight's event will have 4 storytellers, each telling a 10-ish minute story. And this is important. I ask all of our viewers to listen, to understand, and to be present. I encourage you to take a moment wherever you are to put your phone on silent and to mute any notifications. Let's relish this opportunity to turn off distractions and really show up for each other. As you view from home, we invite you to participate in your own way. There are 2 ways you might be viewing tonight: from our virtual theater at campfireathome.com or on your smart TV using the YouTube app for the live stream. For those of you viewing on the Campfire at Home site, you'll see a clap button immediately below the video. Use it as often as you want. When you hear something that moves you, that you agree with, or words that make you feel something, clap away. Clapping for all storytellers is a norm we have here at Campfire. And for us on this side of the screen, we'll be clapping in sign language. If the students could help me demonstrate. Another way to create community tonight is to send a note of support and affirmation directly to a storyteller. If you're watching from campfireathome.com from a computer, tablet, or phone, you can use the feature immediately below the video to select the name of the storyteller from the drop-down menu and send a note of support and affirmation. It'll automatically reload in a couple seconds, or you could click reload so you can send in another one to another storyteller. Your active participation in these affirmations is super important. When we gather for a campfire in person, we cultivate a warm feeling of community. Although we must be physically distanced from one another right now, your interaction, either through the Campfire at Home site, or even just being on the stream with us, will help us to cultivate that same warmth and sense of community that a campfire event is known for. On the count of 3, let's take a collective deep breath and settle into this space together to truly be present to one another. 1, 2, 3. Without further ado, let's begin. Our first storyteller at the campfire tonight is Carlo.
Thank you, Mariah, and thank you all for being here. Come with me, and I will tell you a story about how, when I learned about the life of the Italian Baroque artist Caravaggio, I solved a mystery that I had from my grandmother Rosalia, my Italian grandmother Rosalia, that was over 30 years old. So when I was born, my grandmother was already over 70 years old and had lived in this country for over 50 years. And though she had lived here, like many immigrants, between speaking with her family and her friends, she didn't have to master English. So she spoke this version of Sicilian and English. And so when we would go visit her, it was always a literal foreign experience because we didn't always quite understand everything that was being said. And her house was decorated differently because it was just the way she was comfortable with. And so everything was a little bit confusing for me as a child. But I knew she just had this joy when we come to see us. She'd be so excited. But one thing among many that was kind of confusing is that she'd say, Carlo, which is my name. But then she called my brother, whose name is Mark, Michael. And we didn't know why, but we didn't understand a lot of what was being said. So we just kind of accepted it. And we knew she loved us and we knew she was happy to see us. So in that household, his name was Michael. But one day she tried to explain, and she's standing, with her walker at this point, well into her 80s, and maybe she was 4'11", and just the poster child of an Italian grandmother, just so happy. And she looked at us and she said, "Let me tell you how I know his name is Marco." And she told this long story, and it had something to do with the archangel Saint Michael and his sword, and it went on, and then she got done and proudly proclaimed, "And that's how I know his name is Michael." But we were just as confused as we had been at the beginning because there was so many gaps in the story. So we left that day, and it always stuck with me. So the years went by, and she passed away, and I always had fond memories of being at her house and remembering, but I always remember this pieces of a story and this mystery. Well, not that many years ago, my father passed away, and I just made a decision to dive into understanding this piece of me and my family, this Italian side, this immigrant side. So I started studying Italian, and I started studying the history of Italy, and I had a chance to go there and visit with my. I had been working with an Italian teacher via Skype, and I actually got to go visit her in Rome. And so I was in Rome with Valentina, and we're walking around getting sort of the backstage tour of this ancient city, and she's looking at this piazza and this church and that church, and we turn the corner and she's like, this is one of my favorite churches, we have to go into this church. There's so much serendipity with this journey. But she said, okay, so we look at it, and she goes, it was the la chiesa di San Luigi de Francese, which is this church of St. Louis of the French. Cool. And she said, we have to go in there because it's a beautiful church and there's some Caravaggios you should see. So Caravaggio. So all I knew about Caravaggio at that point is I had taken two art history classes in college that were some of my favorite classes. And they were easy A's, and 20-something-year-old Carlo thought they were just easy classes. I didn't recognize that it was something I was passionate about and excited about. And so I loved the class so much. The art history book is one of the few books I kept from college, and partially because the cover had this beautiful painting on it that we didn't even get to study in class. But I later learned, like 15 years after the class, that it was a Caravaggio. And that's all I knew about this guy. He was Italian, and he made the painting on my book. That's it. Basta. So she goes, there's a Caravaggio, some Caravaggios in here. Okay, great. So we go into the front of the church and turn to the left, and there's this chapel. And on the chapel, there was 3 walls, and each wall had this ginormous painting, all by this artist, all from the book of St. Matthew from the Bible. And on the one on the left was the painting from my book. And 20-something years after this class, I was just still enamored by this painting. And I'll pull it up here real quick. I can't do 2 things at once. This is it. It's a story from the Bible where Jesus is pointing to St. Matthew right here, and he says, come with me. And St. Matthew is a tax collector. He's pointing, and he's shocked as anyone in the room, because tax collectors in the Roman times were not like the IRS, which some people still don't like, but these were private contractors that the Roman government said, this is how much money you have to extract from the citizens. And anything extra you can keep, that's no business of ours. So these were not nice people generally, and they would squeeze people and get as much money as they could from him. So he's sitting there with this pile of money, just shocked that this person's coming to talk to him. So, and it was all done, for the first time ever, as a biblical piece done in period clothing of the day. So there's a lot of things about it that were in its time were shocking and amazing and interesting. And in looking at it, I felt like, when someone sees their favorite musician or artist or movie star or sports star or whatever it was, I just was in awe and speechless. It's so beautiful. And it was way bigger than I imagined, 10 feet wide and 10 feet tall. And I had this little book, and I thought it was just, this big, huge, beautiful. And I was just speechless. And it impacted me so much. I left that place and I went home, and I decided to start studying this guy's life. So I started reading everything I could about Caravaggio. And one day I was driving along and listened to an audiobook, and I almost drove off the road because the author started telling about just facts about the author. And one of the things he said was Caravaggio was not the artist's real name, it was his nickname because he was born in the town of Caravaggio. His real name was Michelangelo Merisi. And there were so many Giovannis and Francescos and Giuseppes that people often had nicknames where they were from or something to do with their physicality. Botticelli means like round barrel, and that's what was the one artist name. And Da Vinci was where Leonardo was born, but Caravaggio was Michelangelo was born. So why was he called Michelangelo? Uh, in Italian families, a lot of times there's a tradition of naming the firstborn son after the father's father and the firstborn daughter after the mother's mother, and then after that you start picking from aunts and uncles. But Michelangelo was not a Merisi family name. So where did that come from? I learned that he was born on September 29th, which is the festival of the Archangel St. Michael, which during the Counter Reformation, St. Michael was super, super important. And he was just this was a big deal. And this was also the time when the plague was still happening. You know, Caravaggio's father and grandfather died from the plague, and lots of people had died in Milan from the plague at this time. So if anything auspicious was present when a child was born, you didn't, ignore that. And so he had to be named after this saint because of the date he was born. Well, I was blown away because that's September 29th is my brother's birthday. And that's the story Rosalia was trying to tell me. Sorry. Um, I felt like she was sitting in the car with me smiling. I felt the joy and love that she was trying to express to us every time we saw her. And pardon me. I felt like she was there and smiling at me. And in my head I could hear, that's how I know his name is Michael. That's what she was trying to say. And I discovered all this stuff, in a sad time when my father had died, and I was trying to understand some pieces of myself. And I said yes to a curiosity about language, and I said yes to like some things in me that I'd been interested in going back into studying this art and this art history that had been a piece of me for so many years that I'd kind of buried. And by saying yes to all those things, I discovered this mystery from my grandmother from decades ago. So if there's things in your life that are calling you, there's something that you're curious about, just follow that thread and say yes. And you have no idea where that'll lead you to and what adventures you'll have. Thank you.
Yeah, let's give it up for Carlo. And we can use this moment to send a note of affirmation using the drop down menu on the Campfire at Home website. And next up to the campfire is Melinda.
Thank you, Mariah. Watching the footage of Mr. George Floyd's murder broke me wide open. It was soul crushing for so many people around the world. When Mr. Floyd was calling out for his mama, I felt so many things: despair, outrage, disgust, shame, sorrow. And I had this sinking feeling in the bottom of my stomach that I had abandoned and betrayed Mr. Floyd in a million small ways of inaction. The rawness and confusion of those thoughts and feelings pushed me to spend this past year reading and learning and examining what it means to be a racist and privileged. I thought all that was behind me, Being racist did not fit into my self-image. And I thought I had done all that education. So I found it really painful to rediscover some of myself that wasn't pleasant. But after Mr. Floyd's death, I knew I was missing vital information, and I wanted to understand. How in the world had my complacency and oblivion contributed to the problem? How did I get here? So I turned to my childhood stories, the stories that shaped me. I pushed myself to remember the community and the family stories and the lore of the neighborhood. The stories, I found out, they're not particularly dramatic or interesting. And actually, somehow the consistent banality of them makes it all the more insidious. I grew up in a rural area south of Miami, Florida, far away from the famed beaches. It was the 1960s, and the divided highway that separated my community had two names. It was known as US 1, and it traveled the length of the state. And in my area and other places, it was also known as South Dixie Highway. Seriously. Black people lived on the west side, white people lived on the east side, and in the middle, we shared grocery stores, banks, drugstores, hardware stores. But what we didn't share were schools and churches. My parents, Mel and Charlie, raised us with the belief that everyone was equal, separate but equal. We were taught to be respectful to everyone no matter what. I lived in a white bubble, even though I was surrounded by many people of color in South Florida. I remember this one particularly hot, sweltering day when we were heading to Grandma's house. The traffic was slow and I was hot, hanging my head out the side window, letting the hot wind blow in my face. And there it was. It was the tallest building I ever saw that wasn't a hotel. It had to have, I don't know, in my mind, 10 floors. It was giant. The concrete building itself looked old and rough, and I noticed the grounds didn't have the usual lush vegetation I was used to seeing. No grass, mainly the sandy dirt. It was stark. Before air conditioning, buildings in Florida were designed with outdoor covered hallways and stairwells for cross ventilation. I knew the building was a residence because there were all these kids playing and laughing and squealing up and down the hallway. And the grown-ups, well, they were sitting in chairs lined up in a row outside their open apartment doors, fanning themselves, trying to catch a breeze, something we all did. I wasn't sure what I was seeing because, well, high-rises were a novelty in Florida. I asked my mom, "Who are those people?" And I remember seeing my mom's green eyes through the rearview mirror, and she simply said, "Those are poor people." Mom went on to tell me that poor people had to have a place to live too, so they lived together there. Mom didn't really address why all those poor people were Black, and I didn't really understand the words poor people anyway. I had so many questions. It was one of those topics and days where there was no real conversation about it. Mom ended it with, "It's just the way it is, Melinda." I caught on her last nerve. And besides, how was my mom going to explain that economic and racial forces pretty inseparable? She did add that my dad grew up poor, but that he had worked hard, he went to school, and he made something of himself. It was that reinforced notion I would hear over and over again, that bottom line, people are responsible for their circumstances, their successes, and their failures. Buying into that meant you really didn't have to actually see the disparity and discrimination. I was schooled in the flawed logic of separate but equal, but taught not to see the unequal playing ground. I got those lessons everywhere. When I was about 14 and the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed, my Southern grandma, Anna Lee, we were having a conversation about how all people had the right to live wherever they wanted to. And my grandma, she agreed with me, but then she added, "There are rules." What? Rules? And then I got it. "You mean, Grandma," I said, "if a Black family moved next door, we couldn't be friends?" And she said, no, no, you would be cordial, but you would not be friends. It's just the way things are, Melinda. We all have these stories. It's taken me 65 years to be uncomfortable in my own white skin, to even know that I should be. To finally explore what it means to be white in a country so divided by race. And you know what, you guys? Strangely enough, it's a welcome discomfort. It's embarrassing because I think I'm finally understanding what Black Americans have been seeing their whole lives about white people and the social construct of race. And now I see racism everywhere, everywhere. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. George Floyd and the police killings before and the ones that are still going on are horrifying, wrong, and senseless. I know right from wrong. As a result, I carry around this profound shame based on the color of my skin. It's curious. Right now, I'm feeling nervous because bringing up my white shame is awkward. It feels as if I'm breaking some covert rule by admitting I have white shame. It's like some twisted betrayal. In the same way, we're taught it's not okay to tell family secrets. And we all have family secrets. It's easy to say, well, I'm not like those white people. Honestly, how can anyone tell? What exactly makes me so different? I've benefited from systemic racism. I want to be courageous and talk with other white people about race and white shame. It's taboo, you know. You know what I'm talking about. I'm curious about what folks have to say. I certainly haven't been taught to see this as my struggle, my responsibility, but I do now. I see it as a white people problem white people problem to solve because white people control all the institutions. Wouldn't it be amazing to have an agreed upon national truth about race, an honest shared narrative of our history? I do not expect or want Black people to care about my consciousness raising about race. I'm thinking Black Americans are sick of trying to drag so-called liberals and progressives along. I get the eye rolling and the frustration. For me, the things like my ignorance, shame, guilt prevented me from looking too closely. I mean, predictably, I would get defensive and reactionary when I would get called out. If you and I were talking and I would tick off 12 reasons why I'm not a racist, it shuts down the conversation, period. I get it. The conversation is uncomfortable, humiliating at times, but it's not going to kill me. Racism keeps killing Black people again and again, as we witnessed with the murder of George Floyd. For now, I'm taking responsibility for missing the mark. It's never too late to change. I'm on a journey, and before I end tonight, I invite you to join me and do just one thing differently. For instance, if somebody starts to tell an off-color joke, stop them. Just point blank ask, help me understand how this is supposed to be funny. By stopping them, you may be accused of not having a sense of humor, but you won't be complicit. With each small behavioral change, we all take a step in solidarity. For now, I wouldn't say I'm woke, but I'm working on it. Thank you for coming.
Let's give it up for Melinda. And use this moment to send her a note of affirmation using the drop-down menu on the Campfire at Home website. Next up to the campfire is Jude.
Thank you, Mariah. And thank you all for coming to Campfire tonight. We're living in dangerous times. This pandemic, it's changed the way that we make decisions. Decisions that used to be easy now require a risk assessment. Like getting my hair cut, I used to be in and out of great clips in 15 minutes. But now, do I really want to sit there with a stranger so close? So do I chop on it myself, as I've been doing, not very successfully? Or do I let it grow out, like I think you might be doing? Or do I mask up, go to great clips, and cross my fingers? That 6-month dental appointment used to be a no-brainer. Do I really want my mouth hanging open in front of a stranger for a prolonged length of time? Maybe if I promise myself that I really will floss morning and night, it'll be all right. And I'll cross my fingers. What about that older relative, grandma? She wants a hug. She really wants a hug. She doesn't care where you've been or what you've done. She wants a hug. Liza, I don't want to be the person that kills grandma. Do you hold your breath, cross your fingers, and hug her anyway? I don't know. What do you do? So, one day, last fall, height of the pandemic, I was getting ready for my daily walk, and so I did my daily risk assessment. I thought to myself, I'm going for a walk outside by myself to a park through a residential business type area. If I see any strangers, I will not talk to them. I mean, stranger danger. Remember that old program? When my kids were small and going through it, I hated that program. Now I live by it. Strangers are dangerous. I won't stop. I'll just speed on past. So I left my mask at home. It was one of those glorious fall days in St. Louis. The sky was that incredible blue. The air was just invigorating and the trees were in all their glory. I had this silly, goofy smile on my face the whole time I was walking. I even waved at a couple of those strangers. So I'm heading back home and I round the bank by the ATM. And for some reason, I saw this woman and she must have done her risk assessment and decided that going to an ATM by herself was no big deal because she too did not have a mask. Her hair was pulled back and she was dressed a lot like me. And I thought she must be younger. And she had this beautiful, beautiful brown skin. And we were waving at each other and saying something about how beautiful the weather was. And something made me stop. Now, I was still on the sidewalk. I was a good 10 feet away. She was in the parking lot, so it was safe. But I still don't know why I stopped. So we went from talking about the weather, and again, I don't know how we got to this, but we started talking about the movie Soul. It's a Disney movie. Have you seen it? Well, if you haven't, you need to because the animation is just terrific. It's about this soul who does not want to get into a body and come to Earth. I don't know, maybe it heard about the pandemic. I don't know, but it's not having it. It is not coming to Earth. And it's also about this man who's a musician and he's very focused on his future. and his goals as a musician. And he's very fearful that he's not going to be able to do what he's planning on doing. And he lives his life so much in the future that he misses a lot of the magical moments that are right there in front of him, right there in the present. So we're talking about this movie, and then, as women of a certain age do, we started to ask each other about our children. And so I told her, I'm the proud mother of two grown-ass men, 29 and 21. And usually I stop there, but there was something about the tilt of this woman's head that made me wonder if she had noticed that there is a big gap between my two sons. And so I found myself telling this stranger, that in between, I lost a baby. And I didn't even know whether my baby was a boy or a girl, but I decided to call her Grace. And even though this was a really long time ago, I, like a lot of other women who have had miscarriages, have some guilt about it. Maybe I should have stopped jogging sooner, or I shouldn't have taken that dance class. Oh, I know. I should not have painted that rocking chair. So this woman, this stranger, she says to me, she says, maybe your Grace is like the soul in the Disney movie. Maybe she didn't want to come to Earth. Maybe it was Grace's choice. This was an amazing thought, and it was so freeing. It was like this big chunk of guilt just floated away. So I asked this lovely woman, I asked her about her children. And she said that she was the proud mother of two grown-ass men too. But then she said, it used to be 3, that her youngest had been murdered. Oh my God, what do you say to somebody about that? I don't know what I said. I really hope that what I said was somehow comforting or at least appropriate. This woman noticed my discomfort about her son being murdered. And she said to me, she said, it's okay. And this slow smile spread across her face. And she said, my son wasn't meant for this world. He's in a better place. And then she said, maybe your Grace is in the place where babies are before they're born. And my son is in the place that our babies go too soon. And maybe somehow they can see each other and talk to each other and keep each other company. And again, this wonderful feeling of comfort came over me. And then we talked about how hard it is to be mothers of Black sons, and how often we stood waiting for them to come home with fear in our hearts. How we worried when they went out at night with their friends or to a protest, or heck, even to go to the store, but to leave the comfort of our homes. How frightening that was for us. And I told her, I said, I gave my boys the talk as best as a white lady can. And then that slow smile again. She kind of peeked up at me and she said, may I have a hug? And I thought, oh my God, stranger, danger, it's a pandemic. I can't hug her. We don't have masks. What could happen? All this fear just came up inside of me for what could happen in the future. And then this new thought zipped into my head in a split second, that I don't want to be like that man in the movie, the musician, who was so afraid so consumed by his fear of the future that he missed those magical moments that were right there in front of him. So I crossed over into the parking lot. I crossed those 10 feet and I hugged her for a long time. I might have crossed my fingers. I don't know. But I was glad I hugged her. And as I stepped back from her, I noticed her vehicle, and on her bumper was a Trump sticker. And then as she waved me down the street, she said, "Have a blessed day." And I thought, wow, we are really different. We're different in politics and in religion and skin color. And then I thought, no. We're not different in the important ways. We're very much the same in our motherhood, the same in our fear, the same in our grief, the same in our humanity. And I thought how wonderful that I had stopped and spoken to a stranger. And what a magical moment this was. And so I'm inviting you to try really hard not to let the fear of this pandemic and the fear of strangers and the fear of our differences keep you from enjoying those magical moments that can crop up and those ways that we can see that we're really so much more the same than we ever have been different. Please don't let fear or this pandemic steal your soul. Thank you for listening.
Let's give it up for Jude. And use this moment to send her a note of affirmation using the drop-down menu on the Campfire at Home website. Let's give a final virtual round of applause for all of our storytellers tonight. And we would like to take a moment to share a handful of affirmations that you all have offered. Carlo, love the story of St. Michael, self-discovery and love of a sweet grandmother. I have no doubt she was there with you. Melinda, thank you for the powerful story. So timely, so important. And Jude, what a brilliant serendipity and sharing of heart wisdom. Once again, give it up for Cindy, Carlo, Melinda, and Jude. If you watched what you saw tonight and thought, hey, maybe I want to do this too, you are in luck. Our next online intro class begins on July 18th and is currently accepting enrollments. While the intro class does not culminate in a public capstone event, it is the foundational stepping stone to take the advanced class and ultimately a capstone night. Intro to Storytelling is an opportunity to engage in deep self-reflection and to reframe and rethink narratives about ourselves. While it is deeply personal, it is also a group cohort experience. And as a cohort, we work together towards shared goals and we develop new connections and friendships with classmates. Again, the next Intro to Storytelling class begins on July 18th. If you're viewing on the Campfire at Home website, simply scroll below to upcoming events and click on Intro to Storytelling. Of course, you can also check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for supporting these storytellers and joining us tonight. We appreciate you all and hope that as you continue about your daily life in this time of uncertainty, you encounter the stories you need to hear and the stories you need to tell. Until next time, good night.